much to our finalists. If you can briefly introduce yourselves, government team, and then opposition team.
Hi, I'm Sai Patel. I'm the first speaker for the government on Nueva PR.
I'm Logan Ramanathan. I'm the second speaker for the government.
Thank you. Opposition?
I'm Jacob Goldman. I'm the first speaker for opposition from Berkeley.
I'm Isaac Clark. I'm the second speaker for opposition for Berkeley.
Thank you. Okay, Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Awesome.
Good luck.
Judges, are you guys all ready? Opponents ready?
Sorry, can everyone in the room please put your phone on silent or do not disturb?
Time will start in 3, 2, 1. Hello, judges and opponents. My name is Sai Patel, and I stand in strongest affirmation of the resolution that Germany should repeal its balanced budget amendment. So first, let's get into what is this round and how should you guys be evaluating it. This is a policy round implied by the word should in the resolution, which means that we as the AF must pick a plan which fulfills the resolution. The burden of the AF is to prove that the plan does more good than harm, and the burden of the negation is to prove that the resolution, or passing the plan, does more harm than good. So what is the plan? The plan is exactly the resolution, that the Republic of Germany will repeal its balanced budget amendment. With that said, let's get into a couple of definitions. Firstly, to repeal means to revoke, specifically in terms of an act, such as the Balanced Budget Amendment. And the Balanced Budget Amendment is a fiscal rule enacted in 2019, which limits the budget deficit to 0.35% of GDP with emergency exceptions. So with that said, let's get into the first of our two advantages, which is about austerity and underinvestment. So first, the uniqueness. What's happening right now? Right now, Germany has this limit of 0.35% of GDP for spending, and with this limited budget, Germany can't do as much. Why? Because this budget is specifically used to invest in things that don't directly impact Germany's GDP in the short run, but instead in the long run. This includes things like investment in infrastructure, social welfare programs, and anything that doesn't pay off immediately, but pays off in the long run. So what we can see that when Germany has decreased the amount of money that they're able to put into long-term projects is two really bad things. One is a lack of investment, and the second point is welfare. So first, a lack of investment. Subpoint A here is that in a country with, quote, chronic underinvestment, this bill has perpetuated disinvestment into services and agriculture. There are a couple of examples of this that I'll get to later, but the main idea is that the necessary things for Germany's economy to thrive in are not getting investment, meaning that they're doomed to fail in the long term. Subpoint B is that underinvestment harms their allies. Little I here is that G7 countries are trusting Germany less and less. So G7 is an alliance of 7 countries that Germany isn't a part of. And because Germany isn't investing in itself, they're not meeting G7 goals about growing their economies and meeting climate goals, which leads to other G7 countries trusting it less. But subpoint C is that specific plans were ruined when this plan was passed. This includes decarbonization of power plants, microelectronic plants, and battery cell production plants, all of which would be really, really key for Germany in order to thrive into the future, and all of which were cut as a result of passing this plan, which we want to repeal. On to welfare, which is the third point. Little a here is that we've seen a lot of defunding of welfare programs in the status quo in Germany, and this is really, really bad because we've seen that the poverty rate has increased rapidly since 2019 when this plan was implemented. Why? Because the government simply has less money to put in these social welfare programs, meaning that people at the brink of poverty are falling in, and people, sorry, no thank you, and people, I'll take it at the bottom, and people who are towards the brink of poverty are falling into it because they don't have the social net that they had before. What this means is not only are they falling into poverty, but they also don't have the ability to give back to the German economy, which means that it's hurting Germany in the long term as well. So, and the fourth point here, is this the fourth point? Yeah, the fourth point here is that supply shortages have been really, really common because of the fact that disinvestment has been really bad, and as a result, this has increased prices. Because of the fact that these industries aren't getting as much funding, they're having to increase prices in order to keep themselves alive. And the fourth point here is that there's no economic backing to support this plan, which is why we see that 61% of Germans oppose it, and why the United States' amount is at 1.2% as opposed to 0.35. So what are the impacts of this? Firstly, it harms people directly. When people don't have access to social welfare programs, they fall into cyclical poverty, and they go from a place of security into a place where they're able to fall into cyclical poverty, which is really, really bad. Additionally, it harms everyday individuals because prices of common goods, things that the German economy relies on, are significantly decreased. The second point here is future disinvestment. Companies in other countries don't want to invest in a country when their main sectors are falling, which is exactly what's happening in the status quo, and it's why other countries in the G7 are looking to Germany less and less. And that brings to the third impact of global perception, whereas that Germany is falling out of the global scale. Like this G7 example is one, but you can see that all countries are looking to Germany as falling behind in their goals, and it's like looking to them less and less as a result. But that said, let's get into the second argument of climate and energy. The first point here is that Germany relies extensively on Russian gas exports. The subpoint A is that 55% of their exports come from Russia and are natural gas, and subpoint B is that it caused a crisis when gas was shut off. So what did Germany do? They switched to Norwegian gas, but this is really bad for two reasons. For one main reason, which is that gas pipelines are very vulnerable to sabotage, and specifically sabotaged by Russia. A good example of this is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, where Russia literally just bombed the pipeline and caused a massive price spike in Germany and harmed lots of people. Because of the fact that these pipelines go through an area where Russia is controlling, Russia is very easily able to bomb these pipelines. So what does Germany need to do? They need to become self-sufficient, and in order to do that, they need to invest in renewable energy. But Germany is behind on renewable energy investment. Subpoint A is that they're far behind their 2030 goals. And the third point here is that large investment is key in order to a renewable transition. Subpoint A is the Green New Deal. It secured the United States as a renewable energy leader and is planning to cut, and is predicted to cut emissions by 43%. Yeah, sorry.
Has the United States passed the Green New Deal, you're saying? Or not?
What?
Are you saying the United States has passed the Green New Deal, or that Germany should pass the Green New Deal? Germany.
Yeah, Germany should pass the Green New Deal, essentially. And they don't have them. So Germany should pass something like the Green New Deal, but they don't have money to do it because of the fact that this thing was implemented. And this is because the plan costs $51 trillion, and by cutting the spending to 0.35%, Germany simply doesn't have the budget for this anymore. In fact, in their 2024 calculation, they were 17 billion euros over, which means that with the existing cuts that they're trying to make, they're still over the amount of money that they're supposed to spend. The subpoint B is that Germany can't afford what is this?
Can't afford without.
Germany can't afford this without taking on debt. And this is really, really bad because Germany taking on debt would obviously be detrimental to the country, especially when investment and things like that are necessary to keep Germany afloat. And they also just can't do this, right? So the links here is that when Germany can invest in self-sufficiency, it's really, really good. The first point here is that it's good politically. Because of the fact that there's the Russia-Ukraine war, obviously, this is why Germany switched away from Russia. And having self-sufficiency ensures that A, they don't have to go back to supporting Russia, but B, they aren't putting the risk of their own people in a bad position. And for those reasons, I strongly urge an affirmation vote. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Gonna go down quickly top of case, then off case, then up case. Gov wants to live in an ideal world where they spend all their money on social welfare, no one's in poverty, and everything is great. The problem is, spending has costs, and you can't spend everything, and so sometimes you have to cut some costs so that your country can function. Quickly on some framing before we go into the arguments. They give a weighing mechanism of essentially net benefits. We think it should be net benefits to Germany specifically. That's because the German government is doing it. Generally, governments care about their own people, and it's probably the most focused to care about your own people in the weighing mechanism. With that, let's go over the first of two contentions. Our first contention is that this bill prevents a debt crisis. Subpoint A is that debt is really bad in general. We have two reasons for that. First is that debt spirals. So when you have a lot of debt, that has interest, which means you have to pay more and more money. Now, to pay that off, often you have to take on more debt or heavily tax the poor, which is even worse, which means that you are either like horribly taxing people or you're taking on more and more debt. The second reason that debt spirals is because debt creates a worse credit rating, which means the more debt you take on, the worse interest you get. In other words, when you have a lot of debt, people aren't so concerned or are more concerned that you won't pay it off because you have a lot, so they're lending it to you at higher interest rates, which means you're worse off in the long term because you have to pay more money back. But then subpoint B is that debt in Germany is specifically bad because it does not have control of its currency. When you talk about debt and paying it off, the most common way that countries can pay off large sums of debt is by devaluing their currency. In other words, they print more money and they can have more money to pay it off, and the value of the debt is lower. Here's the problem: Germany can't do that. Germany is part of the Eurozone, and so they don't have access to printing more money. They don't have access to devaluing their currency, which means when they take on debt, they don't actually have the ability to pay it off very well. So they either have to do really horrible like austerity programs, or they have to just keep paying for debt to pay off their existing debt, which always spirals. The subpoint C then is that a debt crisis caused by this would be a catastrophe. Eventually, this debt spirals, given that like you can't tax people forever. You eventually just have to face the idea that you cannot pay off all of this debt because it is spiraling, because you can't devalue your currency. And that leaves you with two options. Either your government can go bankrupt and like everything collapses, the economy collapses, and all of these prop-ups that the government is doing totally collapse. Or you can ask for austerity from like the IMF, for example. Notice that in the 2010 euro crisis, Germany already had to do this. They already had to get a whole lot of austerity. So probably, if they're going to ask for it again, these austerity measures are going to be absolutely brutal to make sure it never happens again, which means you see horrible economic consequences in the short term, so you don't collapse the euro. The impact of all of this. Even if government wants to tell you that all of these spending programs are overall good, it doesn't really matter, because if you're paying for them with debt. And on balance, debt is going to be bad because Germany actually cannot afford it, and it's entirely dangerous for a country who cannot actually like devalue their currency to be paying for it. This is a program that allows you to spend some. You're still being able to spend 0.35% of your budget, your GDP, on spending, but you're not allowed to spend excessively. That's really good. Our second intention is that this has and will create better spending policy. Subpoint A is that this bill and restriction limits politicians' ability to spend, which means that they have to spend on the most important things. What do I mean by that? In countries where you can just spend like basically infinite money, you can say, you know what, we'll just spend on like the military constantly, and it's all fine. Now you have a very clear restriction. You don't have that much money to spend, which means politicians have to justify everything they do. They're saying, I'm giving this housing program instead of military, and it's a direct trade-off. It can't be like in debater terms permed, because they don't have infinite money. They have 0.35% of their GDP, which means other politicians can say, listen, we have X amount of money, and they want to spend like a large percentage of it on the military, and we're not even a war. You should do better programs. Let us to subpoint B then, is that spending is suddenly more accountable. What do I mean by that? When people are thinking about their budget and they know that they have a pretty restricted budget now and a very set amount of money they can spend, they can't just take on a whole bunch of debt. They're actually a lot more likely to scrutinize the amount of money that's going to other places. In other words, when politicians are elected, they're often not always fully checked in every policy they do. Not the average person isn't going over every single policy a politician implements. But now, they're saying, hey, you know what? We don't have that much money to spend. I need a whole lot more money on housing. I need a whole lot more money on climate change, because I know those programs are important. They're more important than the military, which means politicians are always more accountable for spending more money in better places and less money in places that aren't as important. Let's go over to the government case then. Okay, their first contention is on austerity and overinvestment. And they tell you that you can't do wonderful programs as much. And okay, two responses to this. First, they tell you you can't do as much and you are less long-term averse. In other words, you're not going to invest in things that could help you long-term, because in the short term you can't pay for them. Two responses. First, turn this. Actually, you're encouraged to help you long-term, because you know you can only spend a little bit right now, and you don't have a whole lot of budget, and if you are going to not spend long-term, you're going to deal with this short-term forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You'd much rather spend a little bit of money long-term so you can grow your GDP and spend more in the long-term, and the incentives are actually good. Whereas in the status quo, there is an incentive to spend short-term, because you're going to have basically infinite money in terms of just taking on debt forever. The second response to this is this doesn't actually do enough to prove that their side is good. Why? Because yeah, programs can be good. I mean, yeah, We can spend on welfare and it would be wonderful. We can just give money to everyone and it would be good. But that doesn't prove that it's actually worth the cost. What government needed to tell you is that this debt is worth it and will create actually new economic conditions that will be better. Okay. They also say that it's going to harm alliances because the G7 countries are losing trust in them. Turn this. It's actually going to hurt the EU, Germany's position in the EU, which hurts its alliances even more. Why is that? There's an agreement within the EU that you can only spend 60%, you only have a 60% debt to GDP ratio, which Germany is doing a really bad job of maintaining and is spending overly. Now, or is spending a lot of. Now, in the future, if it goes near that and is still positioned as like the leader of EU and is considered as the one that's like hiking up prices of the EU, that makes it so that people trust Germany less and actually hurts the alliances. No thanks. Okay. Finally, they say like this is about like funding of welfare, and they say that like over the last couple of years, poverty is going up. Notice that this policy was put in place in 2003, and so the last couple of years, poverty going up is because of COVID. I mean, COVID happened, that's why poverty is going up. It's not because, like, randomly this policy is hurting. And in fact, we'd argue that actually it doesn't do this because politicians have better incentives now. That is, they want to help people rather than spending on, like, the military. They have more incentives to do good policy. Okay, let's see. Okay, finally their impacts on social welfare. Like, this isn't enough to prove that their science is good. Second, they say on better climate change. Oh, that's not my stuff. It went somewhere. Second, they talk about better climate change policy. A couple responses to this. First of all, the government still does have money. So you're not going to believe that they're just going to like cut all of their funding programs in terms of like climate change. So to the extent that they're still spending a pretty good amount of money on climate change, you're still doing good. I want to make it clear that like in the status quo, they're not cutting the budget in like by 90%. They weren't spending like horribly. The potential is that they could spend horribly, and we're cutting that down. The second response to this is that like ultimately climate change isn't that impacted by like Germany's actions, impacted by the US, by China, hundreds of other countries across the world. The impact of this is minimal at best. It also doesn't affect Germany more than other countries. I'm so proud to oppose.
Alright. Does anyone mind if I stay seated during this speech?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Go ahead. That's fine.
Yeah, does anyone mind like an off-time roadmap? I know some people prefer that. So, okay.
Go ahead.
So I'll give some analysis on the framework level, then just an overview, and then I'll jump into the government case in order. So that'll be austerity first, and then climate and energy, and then I'll respond to the opposition case in order as well. My time begins. Now, hello judges and opponents, my name is Logan Ramanathan, and today I once again stand in strong affirmation of the resolution at hand. So before we get into the specifics of the arguments that were made in today's debate, I'd like to start with the framework level. Our opponents make one claim here, which is that we should narrow our scope down to Germany. There are two responses here. The first is that this doesn't make sense because this is a net benefits round. It's a policy round, which means we are looking from an egalitarian perspective on like what makes the most impact across the globe. But the second reason is that in order to analyze German impact, you have to look globally. If we see global economic collapse or countries that Germany trades with having like hard times because of climate change, that eventually is going to hurt Germany. That means you should just be looking at a wider scope of impacts across the entire world. With that said, let's get into the overview of today's debate, which is basically that while we give you specific analysis as to why removing this amendment is going to be key to protect Germany's future, our opponents simply wave their hands and tell you stories about how debt spirals might happen or how it might be disastrous if it were to happen. Well, I'm going to explain to you not only that we do need to spend this money in order to prevent Germany from going into collapse, but also that these debt spirals aren't going to happen because our investments are smart and they're going to pay off. So with that said, let's get into this argument about austerities. Our opponents say that it's going to encourage you, we should focus on the now, and that's going to help us later somehow. But what we are saying specifically is that Germany's current economic policy is making it impossible for Germany to have a bright future. We're telling you that since the COVID crisis, Germany has been continuously not able to recover because they have this policy of austerity. My partner gives you these specific warrants as to how agriculture and infrastructure projects have been cut, which means that the German economy is not able to be revitalized. People whose jobs went away in COVID are simply left jobless because there's no government investments. We see that like countries that were able to succeed after the COVID-19 pandemic were able to succeed because they invested heavily. We saw that the US like did policies and like stimulus and infrastructure projects directly after the COVID pandemic to reduce inflation and other things, and this was hugely impactful. Germany simply has been left behind on these policies, and that's why the German people are suffering right now. They tell you that we don't do enough to prove like that this is going to help anything, and that we need to like prove that debt reform is, or debt is going to be like not that bad, and I'll explain that on the other side of this debate. But the fundamental response here is that these investments pay back. Infrastructure investments pay back. Agriculture investments pay back because it goes back into the GDP of the country. If we are investing in infrastructure, like that is one of the best ways to grow our economy. And so if we're the German government, we should be looking out for ourselves and our future and be investing in this money now. They tell you that like this is going to hurt the position inside of the European Union. There's two main responses here. First of all is that the G7 is probably more powerful than the European Union, especially in terms of like Germany's global positioning, because these are the biggest economic powers that they have to play with, the biggest like people that they have to deal with in their future. But secondly, is that most EU countries don't have these like really strict debt policies. So they're going to understand that Germany is trying to make themselves have a brighter future and overall benefit the EU as a whole. If Germany has a good future, that benefits all of the EU, which means they're going to be happy about it. Next, they talk about how poverty has gone up because of COVID, and this passed in 2019. I just don't think that's true. According to my partner, this passed in 2019, but it's not a relevant point. We tell you that welfare is being cut and poverty is increasing rapidly right now. What that proves to you is that Germany hasn't been able to recover from the COVID pandemic, which means they do need to invest even more money to solve this. Our opponents completely dropped this argument about supply shortages and people falling into critical cyclical poverty. So you're probably gonna be looking here to the fact that supply shortages are happening right now. Prices are going up to the point where people are having a hard time affording this, and this is hurting the government, the economy overall. At the end of the next sheet, yeah. So then we get to this argument about climate and energy, and they tell you we're not cutting it that much, and that climate change is not that impactful. Two responses here. First of all, yes we are, because currently Germany is falling way behind on their climate goals. G7 is upset about it, the European Union is upset about it, because they're not going to make their 2030 climate goal. We also tell you specifically that climate change is hugely impactful. For every single million tons of CO2 emitted, 52 people die directly just from the air pollution. There are also cascading effects below that. We see that biodiversity loss, air pollution and the ecosystem collapse are also really bad things that are happening. And while Germany might not be directly affected by things like sea level rise in some areas, we tell you that if the global economy is suffering, so is Germany. And especially regarding these direct deaths that are happening. Especially to the point where Germany is one of the largest producers of CO2 in the entire world. We're telling you that this is not something that we can just hand wave off, and we can't sacrifice our future in order to just prevent some small risk of a death spiral. We tell you this is probably the largest impact in Iran because they also don't respond to this idea of energy terrorism. We tell you that Russia is able to basically have Germany at their will because they previously blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which the entire German economy and energy relies on. We tell you this could lead to the impact where Germans have to go an entire winter without energy. That means people literally freezing in their homes. This is a brink scenario that we have to avoid, which is why it's important to invest in domestic energy production so that we don't have to deal with this in the future. So with that said, let's get to some responses on the debt spiral argument. First of all, the main point here is that we take on debts and we have to tax the poor. But first of all, no, you don't just have to tax the poor. There are lots of ways to recoup investment, things like taxes on the rich, on big businesses. They're not just hurting people bad. They cherry pick this example here. But also the main fact here is that these investments are going to pay off. We tell you that investment in renewable energies pays up to 2 times as much as investment in fossil fuels. It's just slightly more expensive at the start, which means we need to be investing in this right away because it's going to pay us huge dividends. They tell you that the credit rating is going to go down and higher interest rates are going to happen. But we see that countries across the world are able to borrow money because they see that Germany is going to have a bright future and they want to work with Germany in order to recoup that money later on. They tell you that this is going to make the Eurozone really mad. and they're going to have to do austerity or something else. But let's look to the uniqueness. Let's look at what's happening in Germany right now. This austerity is already happening. We're seeing the worst case scenario has already happened. Germany is on the verge of economic collapse because they're not recovering from the COVID pandemic. They're continuing to not be able to spend money on their infrastructure, on their agriculture, on the sectors that are core to their economy. And they're on the verge of being susceptible to the climate crisis, and they don't have stable energy supply. These are all terrible things that are happening right now, and so you shouldn't be buying some risk that our investments somehow don't pay off, that proven investments that time and time have proven to pay off in other countries and previously are not going to pay off. Just don't buy that. Then they tell you that this debt crisis would be disastrous. They say we're going to go bankrupt and ask for money from the IMF. This is just not going to happen because this money is going to pay off. People are going to see that we're investing in our future. Then they talk about better spending policy, and they say we're going to spend on the things that we care about the most. But again, let's look to the status quo. We see that energy and climate investment is not happening right now. Agricultural investment is not happening right now. Military investment might be happening, but that's what the government has picked. We tell you that there are urgent issues that the government in Germany is neglecting right now, and that is causing really bad impacts. This investment is going to be towards good things. That's just how government works. We're going to pay off our debt in the future. So if you believe in securing a future for Germany and for the world from climate change, I strongly urge a vote for the government side. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Isaac Rowan III. I am the second speaker for opposition. As a brief off-time roadmap, I'm going to be going down government case, then I'm going to go down opposition case. I know, big shake-up, but I feel like I have to this round. Special. With all of that said,
Government and opposition.
that's correct. With all of that said, then my time starts now. Let's go on to the government's first confession about austerity. So they tell you that basically Germany's economic policy has prevented a rebound from COVID, and this is horrible. I'd like to say that if we really, their main thing is that poverty has gone up since COVID. Now, I would like to point to the fact that poverty has gone up in almost every nation in the EU, which also all border Germany, which also all do not have this policy in response to COVID. If the best thing they can say is that poverty has gone up, then apparently no economic system in the world works, because poverty has gone up across the world in response to COVID. To say that this is responsible for it is ridiculous, especially when you consider that this budget policy has a prerequisite that allows emergency spending in times of crisis, like Germany did during COVID. So this policy, one, allows for dealing with crises like COVID, and Germany did spend money in term crisis, but if anything, that points to a major flaw in our opponent's case, that they think that spending money fixes all the problems. If anything, this points to the fact that Germany did spend money in response to COVID, and guess what? It did not fix all the problems. So I don't know, when they try and tell you time and time again that if we just spend more money, that we can just deal everything and every investment pays off, that is simply not true, and they missed a lot of things with this. Their next point is that, basically, that agriculture infrastructure was cut. They never actually said it was cut in their first time they read it. The first time they read this, they said that agriculture infrastructure needed investment. There are many things that could use investment, but you have to consider the comparison. Is this investment worth giving debt to future generations, causing more debt in the future, and possibly causing a debt crisis? This is the biggest thing that could possibly affect Germany. I'll get to this later, but when they say Germany is austerity now, then Germany sure isn't ready for austerity later, what real austerity looks like. And they can ask the Greeks what that looks like. Next, we're going to talk about what we look at here about investments pay back. It's true that some investments pay back. Good investments pay back. This policy encourages good investments. Encourages the government to spend the money well, because they know if they spend it, because spending money in a bad way doesn't work because you only have so much money. When you have a limited amount of money, you budget better, you spend money better, and it does encourage long-term investments because you know that if you invest now well, then you're going to be able to have more money in the future to invest later. No, thank you. If you, an alternative, and kind of what their opponents propose, in fact, is that if you can take tons of debt on, you will take that on, you do all this short-term stuff, which is they're like, great, we're going to extend all this welfare now, then they're going to run out of money in 10 years, and they're going to not be able to fund welfare, and they're also not going to fund their healthcare now. This is the result of policies of unrestricted financial spending. I think this is only possible in our opponent's role. Then they try and say, look at the inflation. I'd like you to take something for consideration. Our opponents want you to believe that if the government spent more money, that would help fight inflation. That is not how it works. It's the other way around. Spending money causes inflation. If we want to talk about inflation, our opponent's plan is inflationary. Our plan is to prevent the government spending money and pumping tons of money into the economy prevents inflation. So inflation is a complete turn for our side, and considering that, so let's consider that. Again, So now let's get on to their second question about climate. So their main point is that the climate is still really important. And it's true, the climate does matter. But Germany is not the country for which we need to be talking about the climate. Germany may be filling its 2030 goals only as a result of its 2030 goals being so ambitious, being so pioneering in other countries. Germany is not the country polluting the world and causing climate change. That is countries like China and the USA. Germany, unfortunately for the world, is not the standard. If Germany was the standard for the world, we'd be in a lot better of a place. So when they try and say that Germany's filling its goals, it's filling one of the most ambitious climate goals in the world. And Germany is not significantly contributing to climate change in any meaningful way. So when they try and put to the climate, they have no solvency for climate at all. Their other point here is about Russia controlling the oil for Germany. As they point out, Germany actually has got its oil from Norway. It's now also importing oil from the United States. And while the Nord Stream pipeline was a real thing, guess what? We got past it. Germany got past it. Do you hearing about a massive oil shortage in Germany right now? No, because the EU moves on past Russia. And simply put, it's not a major problem and definitely not enough to win our opponents around. Now let's go into our case. And I think there's a lot of really important stuff which is not really interacted with by our opponents. So our first contention is really important about a debt spiral, right? A debt crisis. So they say that you can just get your money back by taxing the rich. Guys, this is Germany. Germany has taxed the rich. They tax the rich a lot. They have squeezed the rich. If Germany continues to tax the rich, then all it's going to cause is capital flight. The unfortunate reality is, for Germany, the options are either debt or taxing the lower class. They've already used up the reserves of the rich's money. What this means then is, look at these two alternatives. Taxing the poor, obviously really, really bad. They seem to think so also, because they definitely don't want to have to contend with that on their side. Let's look at the other alternative, taking on debt. Great, what does debt go into? It begets more debt. When you take debt, you have to pay interest on the debt. Guess what? If you don't raise taxes, you have to pay more interest on the interest. Guess what? If you pay taxes, you have to pay more interest on that. But all of that causes a debt spiral with more and more interest. This is combined with lower crediting ratings. Our opponents want you to believe that other countries simply will not care about Germany taking on lots of debt and definitely will not lower Germany's credit rating. Guess what? America just had its credit rating lowered. The United States, one of the biggest countries in the world. I definitely think they're willing to lower Germany's credit rating, and this all it means is that debt is going to get even worse. It's true that Germany has great credit right now, but that is only a result of the policy that our opponents want to repeal. Finally, when we go into this idea of foreign affairs, I just like to point out that what we tell you, if we compare the G7 to the EU, I think the EU matters a lot more to Germany. And I think most people would agree here. Because simply put, Germany is the EU, and the EU is Germany. The EU, what Germany does by following the agreement it signed with the EU is provide an example of leadership for the EU, an example for other countries to follow, an example of keeping the European currency strong. That is what's caused by Germany continuing to follow the 60% public GDP to debt ratio as we talked about earlier. So when our opponents tell you that the G7's mad, one, I'm not even sure what they mean by the G7's mad. I'm not sure where they read that. But also the G7 really is not a serious thing. That's where a lot of world leaders who are really just all meet up and they're like, hey guys, how's it going? That doesn't really matter. What matters is the EU, which controls economic policy, controls the euro, controls the amount of money being circulated, all of that, controls free trade agreements. All of that is what matters to Germany. So if we're weighing the EU versus the we should clearly be caring about the EU way more. Okay, finally, I'd like to point out that they try and deal with all of this by saying, well, even our worst impact, austerity, Germany is facing right now. Judge, Germany is not facing austerity. Germany is still having a debt ratio. Austerity for Germany would look like the destruction of its healthcare system. Austerity for Germany would be no investment at all. Austerity for Germany would mean a major rise in taxes. It would mean no infrastructure investments. That's what happens to austerity, and let's look to countries in the EU, which has pursued a similar policy as our opponents would prescribe, spending a lot of money. Greece, Italy, Spain. How did it work out for them? It did not work out that well for these countries. These countries had to end up taking on a massive amount of debt, having to get bailed out by the IMF, cutting all their social welfare programs, and guess what? That's a result of something that can only happen in government's world. There is no possibility of a debt spiral in our world. Finally, they did not really interact with our world. So what we have to get to the end of this is that the debt spiral is a real possibility for Germany if you get rid of this policy, and a debt spiral would cause anything our opponents talk about to such a worst extent, and it is only a possibility in government's role. Let's go into our second contention about better spending. So they just say that things are neglected and that investments will be on a good thing. Well, I'm glad they think investments will be on a good thing, but we guarantee you that investments are being made on a good thing in our world. Our world, as we point out, encourages good investments because you have a limited amount of money. Their world has the country can simply put off their problems to tomorrow with debt and debt until you cannot put off the problem anymore. They don't interact when saying that there's issues neglected. They don't actually interact with their point that you create better spending policy through the current government policy, as we talked about. So, at the end of the day, what we're really looking at here is that the only way you can have an economic crisis is with the repeal of the plan as government proposes. Thank you so much.
Judges, to the extent that there is any possibility of debt spiraling, you put your ballot on the opposition. That's because Germany has never seen anything to the likes of the debt spiraling, the crisis, the austerity that we propose staying away from on this side. 2 voter issues for you today. First, on debt spiraling. We give you a really key warrant here that doesn't go well responded to. We tell you that at any extent, Germany cannot control the currency. So anytime they have debt, it is extremely difficult for them to pay it off. That's because they cannot devalue their currency to any extent. That's how every other country deals with debt. Notice here that they already tax the rich a ton, so they can't just do this magical solution that we talk about all the time in the US of taxing the wealthy rich a little bit. They already squeeze the rich, they already do it, and you do it more, you lose that capital, because you'll lose it to capital flight. I don't think this is well enough responded to, because notice the low burden of proof on this argument. That is, we don't have to prove that Germany will spend like $1 billion, trillion and lose all of its money. We have to prove that it has to spend a little too much, and then that debt will spiral over time because interest goes up, and they have to pay more, and they have to get more debt, and more of their capital leaves because they're being taxed more, and more and more and more until they have a horrible debt crisis, the likes that they cannot deal with. Notice this isn't just theoretical. It happened with Greece, it happened with Germany. It's what happens when you go into horrible debt and you cannot actually control it because you don't have control of your currency. That leads to the second voter issue then on responsible spending. Judges, we tell you a lot in this round that there is irresponsible spending that gets cut down on. What do I mean by that? I'm talking about spending that is ultimately short-term, that is ultimately driven by like political pressure for the status quo, short-term incentives. Maybe people like the military, so you spend a little bit more on the military. People are more interested in keeping their job than doing something that will ultimately benefit the GDP, which means that ultimately you spend things on like short-term policy. That doesn't happen anymore, because now you are saying, listen, voters, literally I cannot spend that and also help the economy, which means that next year, and the next year, and the next year, you are getting less money. They're also incentivized by their politicians that you cannot spend randomly, you must spend well. You cannot just spend like the US does, you cannot just take on massive amounts of wealth. Okay, the government response to this, I think, is pretty thin. They give us a lot about how Germany needs to get out of a problem in the status quo. And I think this is not really a good analysis of the status quo. Because like, yeah, they went through a little bit of poverty when COVID happened. So did everyone else. You rebound eventually. And I think this response is pretty chronocentric. That is, it's analyzing that right now, maybe some spending happens. Notice that we still spend in our world, we're just not doing irresponsible spending, so don't let government come up here and tell you that we're cutting massive amounts of our budget. In terms of weighting, 2 big things. First, any chance of debt spiraling is an independent opposition ballot, because all of their impacts are both preempted and outweighed by this chance. That is, if they want to talk to you about spending, that cannot happen when the IMF tells you we are only giving you a loan to bail you out if you cut all of your spending and you raise taxes. Anything they talk to you about in terms of spending collapses when you have to go through austerity. The second thing here is on time frame. So maybe in the in the short term, some investment is nice, but overall, it creates long-term problems that are harder to deal with. It creates problems that extend for longer, so therefore, you're going to be preferring them. It's true sometimes that spending is helpful. It's true sometimes that we like spending because it benefits you. It's true sometimes that spending keeps your job. But if you're going to run an economy, you have to be comfortable with the idea that you can't spend all your money. You have to be comfortable with the idea that you have to limit the amount of spending because it means that you're going to be able to keep your economy intact. You must oppose.
Okay.
Off-time roadmap, you can probably fill this on a new sheet, but first I'm going to go, actually, hold up. Actually, I'm first going to go over topic case really quickly, like 5 seconds, and then I'll get into the the austerity argument, and then I'll go into the climate and energy argument, and then I'll go into the debt trapping, and then the better spending policy. And then I'll do an underview and kind of write the ballot, so explain how I would vote. Any questions?
Good.
Perfect. Then my 5 minutes will start in 3, 2, 1. Judges, the overview for this round is that in the status quo, there is no hope for Germany, and the only way to solve all of Germany's problems in the indefinite future is to vote AF. In order to see why, let's first go do the framework. My opponents this is really quick, my opponents concede the argument that we should be looking at net benefits to the entire world, so just keep that in mind. Now go to the austerity argument, where my opponents essentially fail to refute the argument that austerity is happening in the status quo. My opponent's examples of austerity is like, decreases of spending in welfare, of healthcare, and infrastructure. They're all things that we're seeing happening in the status quo. Why? Because Germany is in a period of austerity. Why? Because of exactly what me and my partner tell you, which is that Germany doesn't have enough money to invest in big projects. This is why my opponents concede the fact that they cut decarbonization policy, microelectronics, battery cell production, investment into agriculture and services. These are all concrete examples of the fact that Germany simply doesn't have enough money to invest in its future. My opponents' only responses are blippy, and I'll respond to them on the debt trapping argument. Now going on to the climate and energy argument, my opponents essentially only say that Germany doesn't matter for climate change and that Germany had ambitious goals. Judges, Germany is falling behind in the G7, which includes the countries that they blame for climate change. What does this mean? It means that Germany is not upholding its burden as in solving climate change. And what my partner tells you is that Germany is A, part of the problem. He tells you that it's one of the most emitting countries in the world, and that B, it doesn't matter where the problem comes from, because no matter where, if you're putting CO2 into the atmosphere, it's directly taking lives. Which means that you can't buy my opponent simply saying that, Germany doesn't matter in the scale of things. One, Germany is a major player, and two, any negative impact literally kills people. With that said, let's go on to the negation. The first argument of debt trapping, my opponents attempt to tell you that there's only two options, that either they can tax the poor or they can go into a debt cycle. But there is obviously a third option. What is it? It's to take on a little bit of debt, make investments, and have those investments pay off. My opponents concede the two fundamental arguments that prove that investments work, which is one, that these investments have been working in other countries, and two, that investments have been working in Germany in the past. Judges, think to what the United States did during COVID. They passed the Inflation Reduction Act. What did this do? It didn't cut spending, it increased it. Why? Because the United States knows that putting spending and putting investment into a country pays off in the long run. And this is why the United States has been able to prosper and rebound post-COVID. So don't buy it when my opponents say that there's no way for countries to rebound post-COVID. The only part about that is true is there's no way for countries to rebound post-COVID as long as they don't invest in their future. Now onto the better spending policy. Honestly, judges, you can really quickly go over this by saying that no matter what my opponents tell you about hypothetical good policy, what we see in the status quo is that Germany isn't investing into infrastructure and isn't investing into climate change, which are the two things necessary for Germany to thrive, which means that it's proven that in the status quo, under the negation world, spending policy is going into the wrong places, which means the only way to solve the issue is to vote AF, increase the amount of money, and bring back the projects that are decarbonizing plants and doing all of these good things. So what does this mean? This means that when you're evaluating today's debate, you first have to look to the argument of Germany's future. Why? Because it's the largest time frame. It doesn't matter what's happening now, because ultimately the only reason Germany is passing this policy or not is because they want to invest in their future. And if Germany is terminally screwed, then there is no reason for Germany to keep this policy in place. As we speak, Germany has this policy, and the chances of payback from investment are getting smaller and smaller, which means the faster that we can pass the affirmation, the better Germany will be in the long run. And if we never pass the affirmation, Germany will never be able to put enough investment into itself in order to rebound from COVID, which puts them into an infinite cycle of poverty and death. The second, this is obviously the largest impact because it's largest on time frame and probably second largest on magnitude. And the second voter issue is climate change. Why? Because it's the biggest on magnitude. It's A, directly killing people within 100% probability according to science, and B, has the potential to wipe out biodiversity, wipe out entire ecosystems and kill billions upon billions of people. No matter what my opponents try and say, we tell you that climate change's impacts, both big and small, are either high probability or high magnitude, which means you need to be putting them first. And then don't let my opponents fearmonger you into voting on either debt trapping or better spending policy. Why? Because the debt trapping argument simply doesn't stand, because the only way to ensure that the country is terminally screwed is to not invest in its future, and because we see better spending policy when you pass the affirmation. For all of these reasons, there is simply no way you can cast a ballot for the negation. You have to look to the largest impacts, and you have to look to the impacts that actually flow through, which means you have to be voting for the affirmation. Thank
If you can
Every
excuse yourself.
year, should we leave since there were just 7 of us and 200 of them?
The spectators, please stay in your seats.
Really?
Just to avoid
Yeah.
the-
Okay, that's better. Debaters should go.
And then we'll also vote them.
Thank you, judges.
I don't wanna-
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, they're still here. Okay. Oh yeah, and we do a separate. Thank you for remembering.
Okay.
So we do have a decision in the round. Before I announce the decision, I just want to thank some people who made this tournament possible. First and foremost, Bard Queens High School, especially Nate Burles and James Antonaglia, who were the two sort of coordinators and site directors here who did a wonderful job and gave us this great facility where we were able to have our tournament, our first in-person TOC since 2019. Many of you didn't see this, but behind the scenes there was a fantastic team of students from Bard Queens, especially April and Natalia, who were just on everything instantaneously, and it made everything else so much easier. We are eternally grateful to them. I'd also like to thank the wonderful staff. A tournament like this takes a lot of work by a lot of people, and it's never perfect, but everything that you liked about this tournament was the result of a team of fantastic coaches and other people who helped work together to make it possible. This is a product of many hours of work by many, many people. We have to be out of here in a little while, and I want to give the judges a chance to give their RFPs. So I'm not going to list everybody, all the tournament staff, but the list is on tap room. I'd encourage everyone to take a look at it and just appreciate all the people who worked so hard to make this tournament possible. Special shout out to Julie Herman, who yesterday, when we encountered some unanticipated site concerns, was super helpful in helping us think a way clear to finishing the tournament today at the site and getting everything done. And I am so happy that it worked out, and it could not have happened without Julie's help. So thank you so much, Julie. So with that, Lynn, would you please come up here and help me hand out awards?
Well, wait, no, we're not done.
Oh,
We're
okay.
not getting started. Can we give a big round of applause to the biggest man here? Like, would you do with left leg because he's really tired too is Rada, right? Tapping and all that. And so, yes.
Okay, so we had what I thought was a really excellent final round. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. And on a 3-1 decision, it's been a very long weekend. On a 4-3 decision, the 2024 National Parliamentary Debate League Tournament of Champions champion is the team of Goldman and Graldnick McClurg from Berkeley we have awards for the runners-up. There are there should be two of those, yeah. So the two small, those two are for the runners-up. And then for the champions, there are the other two small ones, and then the two big cups. And then there is a perpetual trophy.
This one's a runner-up.
Those are the runners-up. Okay. The runners-up get okay, so those you get, you thought you were just getting the pet rocks, but you get the big ones too. Okay. And then we have the perpetual trophy, which has lived at Nueva for the last year and will live at Berkeley for the next year and then go somewhere else. So congratulations to both teams. Wonderful, excellent, fantastic job. And we do have to be out of here in 14 minutes. This was not my rule. I would love to have you stay all night and give RFPs as long as you like, but they are kicking us out in 14 minutes, which I guess adds up to 2 minutes per judge. So please do the best you can with 2 minutes, and the debaters will also read whatever feedback you read on the ballots.
I'll start because I submitted my ballot last. So I'll just read straight out the RFP. The connection between debt and interest rates is missing from this debate. For debt to be worth the risk, the ROI needs to be higher than the interest rate. The greater the interest rate, the higher the likelihood of a debt spiral. Neither side tells me if the interest rates are high or low, so I am left with the understanding that debt is always good if there are potential projects needing investment, or that it's always bad because of the risk of a debt spiral. So you should add that to your debt conversation in the debate. So I buy into the argument that the likelihood of a debt spiral is concerning due to Germany's lack of control over the euro and its inability to devalue its currency. Moreover, the opposition tells me that this argument preempts the government case if an IMF bailout requires austerity, even at the point at which I'm concerned about climate change or the need for other investments in other sectors. The eventual debt spiral will lead to austerity anyhow. The government needed to provide me a reason why the ROI is so clearly in Germany's favor. Conversation about interest rates being low would have done that for me, but the assertion that the U.S. IRA is a proven case when it's yet to be implemented long enough for us to make that determination is not sufficient.
I was the sixth ballot in, and I squirreled. So I vote government this debate. I think I need some clarification of what spending we're going to get rid of. And I think it's a plausible answer from op is, heck, any of it, because all of it's so bad because it leads to debt. But I think that there is the sort of third way argument that PMR makes really compellingly. There are basically three ways the government can get money. One, taxes, basically doing all of that it can. Two, debt, super duper bad. Three, grow the economy so you're still getting the same tax rate but in a bigger pie. And I think there is an explanation of what kind of things get cut from Gov that I don't think I get from op. What gets cut? Spending on infrastructure. Infrastructure spending is therefore always multiplicative. Two ways. First, industrial subsidization. It tends to mean just industry gets more productive. Second, energy extraction and energy security, meaning you just have a bigger economy. This is what I think short circuits enough of debt trap and tells me that just in general investment is good and pays off. It's very quantitative, whether or not it's just like does the rate of economic growth exceed the rate that interest rates go up? I don't know. I don't want to do the work to figure it out. None of the teams do either. But I think that there's at least enough mechanization that it is at least a slightly faster rate of growth of the economy. Therefore, spend, and I vote up in this debate. Who's the fifth ballot in?
I don't think we necessarily need to go in that order. How about you go?
Alright, I'll go next. So I voted for the opposition in this one, mostly because they framed this within the concept of the European Union, and their point that Germany does not have control over its money supply and also doesn't have control over the valuation of its currency was really impactful because the government assumes that this is like a very globalized situation, and they draw examples from the United States and other countries that don't have those restrictions. So how am I supposed to buy that the positive impacts brought out of the United States, as example, will apply to Germany if Germany has all these caveats or have all of these weighing factors that the government does not consider? So that's pretty much the biggest reason why I voted for the opposition in this case. And then, of course, this flows through all of the other examples within the EU context. Of course, the government completely ignores the EU, but Germany is a part of the European Union. The European Union is a much bigger, much more substantial organization compared to the G7. Therefore, all of these EU contingencies are very much impactful, and I believe them far more than whatever the government says with regard to general principles like investment being good. Yes, investment is good, but I also can't control my interest rates, or I can't control my money supply, because that's well to the European Union government, not the German government. Therefore, is it worth the risk? Other examples like Germany, Greece, and Italy also helped us to provide substantial historical narrative for this, and it just makes me feel like the opposition narrative is far more compelling than what the government promises in their.
I go last.
I voted on the government in this case because, to me, I thought that the case came down to the net benefits analysis provided by the framework, and it ultimately came down to determining which side helps Germany grow the most and where does the money go on each side. And within the opposition framework, there was the possibility of a debt spiral, but I wasn't really sold on it being more than a possibility. And so there was definitely a chance at a catastrophic event, but on the other hand, I don't know if that was going to be likely to occur. I needed to be sold more on that. And on the other hand, what I saw from the government was the fact that within the status quo, people aren't spending money where it's supposed to be spent, such as agriculture and infrastructure. And that was a very compelling point for me, that within the status quo, the right spending isn't happening, which was one of your key contentions. So I thought that ultimately fell for me. And then it provided a possibility on the government side that any form of investment in these areas could promote benefits and also could help with the climate change argument, which is a significant net benefit in this case. And it was one that ultimately helped me sway my vote.
Okay, I personally voted for op. I don't think that the weighing mechanism burden has much weight, seeing as though it was so quickly abandoned by both sides, right? So because so much was allowed to fall by the wayside, which was a critical error done by both parties, especially Gov, though, this debate really became about economic likelihood and climate change, right? So what are the impacts of that economic likelihood? It was not strategic, however, for both sides to allow the debate to fall into these two major things as contentions. As for economic likelihood, the problem was that government centered their entire argument based off of investment. This is what proves to be your hamasha, right? Your like fatal flaw. Because how are we going to know that going into a greater deficit is going to lead to investment? You never once attempt to actually prove your like biggest claim. So then all of the impacts thereafter fall, because this point is essentially an assertion. But then on top of that, you have ARP that then comes in and then claims that debt leads to debt spiral and like all of the like hazardous things of debt, which is far more practical and far more realistic. So they won that automatically. And then of course, because all of the other implications and claims stemmed from economic likelihood, the debate was therefore easily won by them.
So also my iPad is at 1%, so if it dies in the middle of my hierarchies, I'm really sorry, but I won't be able to finish. But yeah, I ended up voting on the Gov. There were two main questions that I think were like the main points of clash. One is like who is going to have like better programs in the long term to like help Germany's citizens, and then two, like which side will have like this like economic spiral. So on the issue of who will have better programs, there was the argumentation by the opposition that there's going to be pressure for like better policy to be enacted because of the limitations. I think that this was well refuted by the Gov side, that the status quo shows that there have been like a lot of cuts to important programs, and especially energy programs. And then I'm also told that like the lack of investment in the status quo will also spiral. So the point about like all the different outlets of renewable energy being cut, welfare programs being cut, I buy that like on balance there's going to be better programs in the government role. So then that leads to the second question about which one is going to lead to economic spiraling. So this was like, it was kind of hard for me to deal with this issue just because I felt like there was no like clear brink that the opposition was giving me that says that like specifically like increasing the 0.35 program to like something slightly higher is going to lead to this like dramatic debt spiral that's going to lead to like, you know, Germany's economy collapsing. I don't necessarily buy that just because I'm given a lot of clear analysis that like the small amount of debt that's going to be incurred every year is going to be outweighed by the amount of investment, and that there's been proven evidence that shows that investment leads to, you know, better return on money. But I'll also write more in my articles on that.
Great. I guess I'm the last. First things first, great debate by both of you. How do you both feel? Good? This was close. I ended up voting for the opposition because, yes, government provided some valid points that investment is good. The lack of investment is hurting the economy. Germany lacks investment in self-sufficiency. But what really swayed me was the LO and the MO in their constructive speeches. And they mentioned that, well, of course, they mentioned the debt spiral. I wish there was more of a conversation about the historical precedent. Prime Minister, I mean, I wish there would have been, I didn't catch a criteria on this, but if I had to recommend a criteria, it would have been a preponderance of evidence, where you guys could have talked a lot about the historical precedent of Germany's history. Germany has, this is not the first time that Germany has faced a financial crisis. It did so during the aftermath of World War I, 100 years ago, where the German economy collapsed. The German government printed lots of what's called German marks, which led to an inflationary period, and which devalued its currency. And also, Germany also faced a devaluation period in the aftermath of World War II, right? I wish there would have been a lot more discussion about the historical precedent related to what we're seeing today, because history tends to repeat itself. I would have liked to have seen some more direct clash against the opposition's points about, definitely about, about spending. I mean, there's a lot of talk about short term, but more about long term, right? And they brought up some valid points about Greece, Italy, neighboring countries have had their own economic crises as well. I know we're all fixing to leave, so I wrote a lot down. Take some time to read through it. But all in all, this was a great debate.
One more announcement, there is a lost and found near the 6th floor elevators. I know there's some glasses there, and there may be a couple other things too, so please check it.
Hey, so can I take a picture of you guys? Hang on, hang on.